friends. Are you ready to learn some more? All right, this lesson is called Liberty and Justice for All. Before we can jump into it, we are going to review what we learned so far, because we've learned a lot. What are the names of the founding fathers that you have heard stories about so far? George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. So, what have we been learning about? Mostly American men who were important to the development of America before, during, and after the war, right? Today, you're going to learn about others who were living in America at the same time: enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and women. I want you to think about what these groups of people might have been doing while others were off fighting and planning their independence from Great Britain. Okay, what do you think? Today, you're going to hear two words in the read aloud. You're going to hear liberty and you're going to hear justice. Now, liberty means freedom, and the war against Great Britain was fought so that Americans could be free citizens, also to make their own laws, right? So, liberty means freedom. I want you to say that with me. Ready? Liberty means freedom. We're going to say it again. Liberty means freedom. One more time. Liberty means freedom. Okay. Now, justice means treating others fairly. And the war was fought in part to ensure or make sure that the laws they made were fair for everyone. Okay. So, justice means fairness. I want you to repeat that. Justice means fairness. One more time. Justice means fairness. One more time. Justice means fairness. All right. Think about all three groups: enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and women. And I want you to decide whether these people were given liberty and justice, freedom, and fairness. Okay? Think about that. When the United States was a new country, do you think that those three groups were given liberty and justice, freedom and fairness? Let's find out. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where have you heard those words before? Listen again and see if you remember who wrote these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who wrote those important words? He was a founder and a wonderful writer. He lived at Monticello and he became the third president. Who was it? Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson wrote them as part of our Declaration of Independence. Remember how the founders felt that they were being treated unfairly by the British? They did not feel that they were being treated equally or the same as the British on the other side of the ocean. Right? The colonists, they wanted liberty or freedom from the rules of the British. What were the British doing that the Americans felt was so unfair? They were making them pay taxes that were way too high, and they didn't even get to contribute or voice their opinions about what those taxes should go towards, right? So when Jefferson sat down to write these famous words, he wanted to make sure that the new American nation would treat its people fairly. Okay? He wanted to make sure that everyone was going to be treated fairly. Again, when the founders met to write our Constitution of the United States, they wrote about liberty and justice. Justice means fairness, so they were writing about freedom and fairness when they wrote about liberty and justice. When we hold our hands over our hearts and pledge allegiance to our country, our final words are, with liberty and justice for all. These are important words written by our founders, but not all people were treated fairly in the American colonies. So even though those words were written, not everybody was treated fairly. Can you think of anyone who was not being treated fairly without justice in the American colonies? Let's look back at the 1700s, during and after the war, when the founders were busy writing these important words. Whom did they mean when they wrote in the Constitution, "We the people of the United States"? Who did they mean? Some people say they must have just been thinking about themselves, a group of white men who made the laws of the land. Were they forgetting the other people on the continent? Native Americans who had lived there the longest? Women and enslaved Africans? These were very smart men writing the words that they knew would be read and reread by others for many, many years to come. They were writing for the future. Nevertheless, it is true that not everyone in colonial times was treated equally. And even today, people are still seeking liberty and justice for all. During the Revolutionary War, women had different roles than they have today. Although today many women serve in our military and help us by fighting in wars, this wasn't the case during the Revolutionary War. Some women wanted to be soldiers, but they were not allowed to join the army. Why do you think they weren't allowed to fight? Do you think that was fair? We know that some women actually disguised themselves by dressing like men so that they could fight alongside of them. I want you to look at this picture right here. Okay, let me get my pointer. This picture. One of the most famous of these women was Deborah Sampson, who fought in the war under the name of Robert Shirtliff. Women also were not allowed to vote, and in fact, all women did not receive the right to vote in America for nearly 150 years after the Constitution was written. So, about 100 years ago, women were finally allowed to vote. Remember, one reason that the war was fought was because the colonists felt that it was unfair that they could not vote in the British Parliament, and yet, women weren't allowed to vote in their own land. Do you think that's fair? No, I don't think so. So, was that liberty and justice really for all? No. There were many people from Africa who were brought to America and enslaved by colonists. When the colonists decided to fight for their freedom from Great Britain, they themselves were keeping freedom from a large number of Africans by enslaving them. These Africans did not have the freedom to choose how to live their lives. Slavery was especially common in the South, where huge plantations had large amounts of land to farm, and colonists depended upon the work of enslaved Africans. Can you imagine how difficult it was to harvest or pick crops, like the cotton shown in this picture, before there were machines to do it? Can you imagine doing that all day, every day, and not getting paid and being treated poorly? It's awful, isn't it? In the New England and Middle States, slavery started to disappear after the Revolutionary War, but it continued for a long time in the South, where these large farms were located. Enslaved Africans were not allowed to vote. So, once again, was that liberty and justice for all? No. For a long time, Native Americans lived on the North American continent alone. Yet, life for them began changing when the first European explorers arrived hundreds of years before the Revolutionary War. You will remember that some of them chose to help the colonists and trade with them when they first arrived. However, it wasn't long before the colonists started exploring lands to the west, pushing Native Americans off their land. Native Americans were also not allowed to vote. So, I'll ask you again. Was that liberty and justice for all? No. So what do you think? Was the decision of our nation's founders to fight a 6-year war for independence a wise decision? It probably was. The government they set up 200 years ago has served as a model for the rest of the world ever since. It was certainly not fair to all the people in the early years, and there are still many ways in which it can be improved, but it is up to us, we the people, to make each day better for all of us. Okay? So even though at the beginning everybody wasn't treated equally, we've made some changes since then, right? Women are now allowed to vote. We don't have slaves anymore. African Americans are now allowed to vote. Okay? Native Americans are now allowed to vote. We've made a lot of changes. There's still a long way to go, but we've done a lot of good things, okay? So let's keep it up, we the people. Alrighty, what do you think? Question time? Yes. What are the two big words that you were listening for in the read aloud? Liberty and justice. Do you remember what those two words mean? Yeah, liberty means freedom, and justice means fairness. The Declaration of Independence of the new nation states that all men are created equal. What groups of people that you heard about were not given certain rights at the time that the Declaration was written? So at the very beginning, who was not treated fairly? Yeah, the women, the enslaved Africans, and the Native Americans. They were not treated fairly, were they? If a woman wanted to fight in battle, what did she have to do? Yeah, she had to disguise herself as a man because they wouldn't let women fight back then. What were some ways enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and women were not given liberty or justice? None of them were allowed to vote. That's true. The African Americans did not have freedoms at all, right? They didn't have any freedoms. Native Americans were pushed off their land, and that's not right. And then the women, they weren't allowed to fight. And like I said earlier, none of them were allowed to vote. So now we are going to learn, or we're going to focus on our word work, okay? So our word for today was equally, all right? In the read aloud, you heard me say, the founders did not feel they were being treated equally or the same as the British on the other side of the ocean. Say the word equally for me. Monster voice, mouse voice, whisper voice. Go ahead. Equally. Equally. Equally means treating someone exactly the same as another, or dividing something into parts that are the same size or amount. I divided the pie equally among all the people at the table. I want you to tell me about how you or others treat other people equally, or how you might have divided something equally among your friends. Try to use the word equally when you talk about it. What's the word we've been talking about, guys? Equally. I'm going to name two groups of people, and if you think that they are treated equally or in the same way, I want you to say they are treated equally. If you don't think that they are treated the same, I want you to say they are not treated equally. And then I want you to explain why. So there's not really a right or wrong answer, as long as you can back it up, okay? So parents and children, in your opinion, do you think that they are treated equally? I don't think that they are treated equally. Not until the children are grown up. And then even still, sometimes your parents say, nope, you can't do that because I said so. What about girls and boys? I think that for the most part, girls and boys are treated equally. What about students and teachers? No, probably not. Sometimes I come back from the teacher room with some pie, and you guys are all like, we want some, and what do I tell you? Sorry, you're not a teacher. All right, what about brothers and sisters? Some of you might think yes, some of you might think no. I think that it depends on the family. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned about the difference between liberty and justice. And I will be talking to you soon. Bye, guys.